Okay, so now that we know how to implement our hashing of our passwords, let's go ahead and try and implement this. Okay, so the first thing we'll need to do, oh, and by the way, here I've just realized I have a bug. This should be if not user, because we are testing whether we didn't find the user, and in the case we didn't find the user with this check if exists method, then we are going to go ahead and create one. Otherwise, we need to return that this email already exists, okay? So this should be if not user, okay? Sorry about that. Okay, so to implement our encryption of our password, we need to import a couple of libraries, okay? So we're going to start out by importing from hashlib, import SHA-256. Okay, this will be the algorithm we will be using to encrypt our password. Next is from base64, import b64 encode, okay? Make sure it's encode, not decode. Next is from OS, import urandom, okay? And finally, import UUID, okay? We will see how we will be using each one of these in just a little second. Okay, so now we can go ahead and implement the hashing of our password, okay? So I'm going to just delete all of those lines that we had previously. And the first thing we need to do is we need to create the salt, okay? So if you remember, the salt is basically just a random string of characters, okay? And the randomness of the characters needs to be very strong, and it needs to be a long string, so it makes, cracking the password even harder, okay? So let's say random bytes. This will be the name of our variable. Is going to be urandom, and we need to provide a length of the string, so we'll pass in 64, okay? It's going to be 64 bytes long. Now, these are going to be bytes, so we need to convert the bytes into actual strings, so we can say salt is equal to b64 encode of random bytes, so we pass in random bytes into the b64, and then we need to decode it, okay? So decode into a format, and the format is going to be UTF-8, okay? UTF-8 is a format of encoding strings. It's a universal format which serves for I think, if not all, the majority of languages, because it supports all sorts of different characters. So we're going to use UTF-8 to decode this B64 of the random bytes, okay? So now we have our salt. So we can go ahead and actually hash our password. So we can say hashed password is equal to the SHA-256 of our password. But remember, we need to also hash the salt. So we're going to add it before the password, okay? So we're going to say salt concatenated with our password is going to be our hashed password. Now, SHA-256 returns a object, so we need to convert this into string by passing the hex digest method. So .hex digest, okay? And here we have our hashed password. But like I said in the previous video, we need to also store the salt somewhere. So the way I like to do it is I just concatenate the salt to this entire hashed string, okay? Why do I do this? Well, because the salt is always going to be of a fixed length. So why not just, store it in the same field, and then when we're going to try and validate the password, we know that this salt is of a fixed length, so we can just slice this entire string and extract the two components, right? The salt and the hash password. So once we've extracted the salt, we can go ahead and check the user's password using the salt that we have extracted, okay? Now, another thing you can see is that we're going to be generating a salt for every single new user, okay? So when we don't find a user, we need to create one. And when we create one, we're going to be creating a new salt for every single user. Now, this is considered a good practice, because what we cannot do is reuse the same salt for every single user, because that would kind of defeat the whole purpose of this entire randomness thing. I mean, yes, we would generate one random string, but we need to generate a random string for every single user so that the salts are not equal, so that it makes it cracking the password even harder, okay? Because every user will have a password with a unique salt. Okay, good. And now the last thing we need to generate is this confirmation code, okay? Remember, we're going to be sending out an email to confirm the count. So we need to generate this confirmation code. So let's say confirmation code is equal to UUID, .uid4, okay, and this will again return the object. So we need to pass in the get hex method. Okay, good. And we need to make sure this is a string and not some kind of Unicode. So we will pass in this whole entire thing into the string function to make sure we are retrieving a string. Okay. So now we can go ahead and actually create our user. So let's say new user key, and I'll get into what the key is in just a second, is equal to our class. So our class is users, and say name is equal to name, email is equal to email, password is equal to hashed password. Okay, this is very important. We're storing the hashed password, not the original. And then confirmation code is equal to confirmation code. Okay. Now we have created the instance, but we need to actually put it to the data store. So we run the put method onto it. Okay, so this dot put. Okay, good. And finally, we need to return something. What is this user key? Okay, whenever we put something to the data store, this method returns the key, which we can then use to access this instance that we just put into the data store. So essentially, it's kind of like a unique ID, right? So we have this key, if we use the key and call the get method on this key, we will retrieve this instance of whatever we're putting into the data source, in this case, our user. So we would retrieve this user, okay? Now, the key is comprised of two main things. One is the class, right, or the kind. So in this case, it's going to be users, and it's specified as a string. And the next item is the ID. So the ID is really what makes it unique within the class, okay? So a ID cannot repeat itself within a class, but it may repeat itself when we have more than one class, okay? So what makes a key unique is the combination of the class and the ID, okay? And we will see this in a bit more detail in just a bit, okay? But anyway, just remember that the key, actually, let's just print out the key for when we create our user. You'll see how the key looks like. Okay. Okay. So let's return created is equal to true, or the value is true of the created key. We're not going to be returning a title and a message because we're not going to print the error box. We're instead going to print something else. But we will need to extract the user ID. So again, this is the ID component of the key, and you'll see it just a second when we print the key out. So this will be new user key, and we need to pass in the ID method just to get the ID. We don't want the entire key, okay? And then we need to pass in the confirmation code. So I'll say confirmation code, and the value is going to be confirmation code. Okay, great. Good. So let's see if this works. But before we do, we actually need to implement this into our register Pi. So the first thing we need to do is we need to import the model, okay? So from models.users import user, okay? This is our class or our model. Now inside of this test, where we're testing if we're receiving a name, an email, and a password, we need to call the users and call the add new user method that we just created. And we need to pass in the name, the email, and the password, okay? And let's say this is going to be our JSON response is going to be equal to this, and let's just print out the JSON response. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, great. So let's see if this is working. Let's go back to our application, refresh just in case, register, and I'm going to say just any old email and say name is M and password is going to be, let's say, test. Okay, register. And something has happened. Let's see in our console what we have printed out, and we see this is our key, right? This is the key we have printed out for our user. And we see that we're returning created is equal to true, the confirmation has been created, and the user ID is this here. Okay, you see that the user ID is exactly the same as the ID component in the key, okay? Now this L just stands that it's a long integer. Just ignore this L, okay? Let's go to our data store administration. So we need to go to localhost port 8000, data store viewer, and we see that we in fact have this user created, and its ID is the same number we've seen here and here, okay? Okay, great. So this is the entire key. So this is a object, and if we apply the get method to this object, we would retrieve the whole entire user, okay? And then we can see the password is hashed. Okay, I did not type all of this out. This is just the hashing of my password. So we see everything is working. And let's test out and try re-register the same user, see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to click again to send the same request. And let's see what just happened, okay? See, we're not being printed out the key again because we're not creating the same user again, and we're getting entitled this email is already in use and created is equal to false. Okay, so this is fantastic. It's working as we expected. Okay, great.